Okay, class, today we're going to talk about the preterite in the imperfect. The preterite in Spanish translates to ed in English. For example, if we say estudiaste, that would translate to you studied or I studied. It's kind of funny. We have hablaron, which would mean they talked. Escucharon, they listened. And comieron, they ate. Notice that ate happens to be an irregular verb in English. So ate, saw, found. There are lots of verbs like that do not, in fact, end in ed. So I don't want you to think that every single verb has to end in ed. The imperfect most often translates to English in the following ways. Yo escuchaba translates to I was listening. This is where we have the was or were, depending on who the subject is, plus ing. The ing is the thing that comes at the end. It can also translate to I used to listen. Yo vivía, I was living, and again, or I used to live. The preterite is about action. Remember we said that the preterite has to do with action. So things that we can see that we could act out, that would be good stuff if we were to play a game of charades. For example, we have I ran, corrí. She listened, escuchó. We talked, hablamos. Hablamos is different than saying I was talking, hablaba. So I want you to understand the difference between the preterite and the imperfect. The imperfect is was or were plus ing. The preterite is going to end in ed. Uses of the preterite. We talk about the preterite when we talk about one-time actions. So, ella habló con su padre, escribió un ensayo para la clase de historia. El viernes pasado yo fui a un concierto. Last Friday I went to a concert. That tells us that it's done and over with. I wrote an essay. Done and over with. I talked, or she talked with her father. Number 2 is what we do when we do anuncios. We're narrating. We're giving just the facts. We're not filling in any blanks. We're not giving tons of detail. This would be the skeleton for most of the anuncios. Yo fui a la escuela, hice mi tarea, mi trabajo, comí el almuerzo y fui a la casa. Not a very interesting story. The part that makes it interesting is the details. The details, remember, are where the imperfect come in. That's where we would fill in the blanks, where we would tell what kind of day you had, what you ate for lunch, whether it was good or not. The imperfect is used for details about the actions that you're narrating. We use it for interrupting actions. So, for instance, yo estudiaba en mi cuarto y de repente un béisbol rompió la ventana de mi cuarto. So we have our imperfect, our thing that was ongoing, when all of a sudden the preterite. The preterite is that arrow that breaks in and stops that ongoing action. So I was listening, there's my ongoing action, when all of a sudden my mom called me down to the kitchen. That was what was being interrupted. We use the preterite when we use verbs of the senses. We talked about how these things, once they happen, they're usually done. If you say you ate something, that's done and over with. If you saw something, if you heard someone talking about you, those are things that, as actions, they happen one time and then they're done and over with. Do want to point out that this is a general rule. These are good actions that can be interrupted. It would be different to say, I ate in the preterite, versus I was eating in the imperfect. This one is all keywords that signal the preterite. I got to write in some tildes over here, so we have all of these words that tell us that the preterite is coming. When we use the imperfect, our keyword that we think about is description. So we use it for habitual, repeated actions. So en los veranos yo iba a la playa con mi familia muchas veces. In the summers, I used to go to the beach with my family. It tells us that it happened over and over again. Nadábamos y comíamos en la playa. We used to eat and swim at the beach. Nos divertíamos mucho en los veranos. Because I chose the imperfect, I can tell that it's something that happened over and over and over again. We use the imperfect to talk about was or were plus ing. We often use this in storytelling. So, I have the verb andaba, which means I was walking in the imperfect, and anduve in the preterite, I walked. Comía, I was eating, versus comí, I ate. So just keep an eye on those differences. We use the imperfect to fill in details, and I've given you some examples of age, time, weather, description, settings. These are the details that make a story interesting. This is the stuff that we would fill into our anuncios to make it more like a story and less like a list of events that happened. Mental processes and emotions, anything that happens in your head or your heart. So these are a list of verbs that oftentimes come in the imperfect. If you say you wanted something, that's not really an action, that's something that's happening in your head. If you think, if you believe, if you prefer, if you wish, those are things that happen in your head. So those are going to come in the imperfect tense. We use the imperfect tense for multitasking, two actions happening at the same time. Caminaba mientras hablaba. Escuchaba mientras hacía mi tarea. Hacía mi tarea mientras hablaba. Two things that are happening at exactly the same time. Nothing is being interrupted, they're both ongoing. And then we have a list of words to use with the imperfect. So we have generalmente, all the way down to some of the ones that you can't see are the de niño or de niña, which are the as when I was a child, and I also added in this en mi niñez. En mi niñez means in my childhood. So these are good phrases to use with the imperfect. They show that it's not just a one-time action, but that it's a repeated action.